Okay, today's episode of the JC Syndicate podcast is brought to you by Ranger Essentials Coffee Company. Fueling your mission one bold cup at a time, whether you're in the field, at the office, or burning the midnight oil, Ranger Essentials delivers premium, mission-ready coffee inspired by grit and resilience of Robert Rogers himself. Visit rangeressentialscoffee.com and use code JCPodcast for 15% off your first order. Stay sharp and stay essential. Okay, today we have an amazing podcast set up. We're going to be speaking with Rachel Morrow. Rachel, hello. You are on episode 003 of JC Syndicated.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and just read your bio here to give everybody context of who you are as a person and kind of what the podcast is going to be about. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Rachel Morrow, a proud California native and Tehachapi High School graduate with a passion for creativity, helping others, and public speaking. Recently transitioning to life as a stay-at-home mom, Rachel previously thrived as an event coordinator specializing in weddings and social events. In 2017, she endured the unimaginable as a victim of the Route 91 Harvest Festival shooting in Las Vegas, where she was shot 3 times in the torso, piercing her heart, but miraculously survived. Today, Rachel has a strong interest in improving school systems, real estate investment, and exploring opportunities in public speaking, using her resilience and story to inspire others. Rachel, welcome.
Yes, thanks again.
It's so good to have you. We'll just throw it out here now. I've known you your whole life, actually, and I know you have an incredible story, but what we're going to do here on this podcast is we're going to get into it a little bit. And we're really going to start at the beginning and kind of work our way through and see if we could find that golden thread. But I'd love for you to be able to just tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, some family life, and we'll let you have the floor here.
Sure. So obviously I am a California native. Grew up there my whole life and spent the last 12 years in California. We currently are in Nebraska now, which is where my husband's family is from. And we have one child who is around 4 years old and spending some time in this next year, one-on-one time with her. But yeah, it's from California. I spent there, did some wedding coordinating prior to attending the Route 91 Harvest Festival in Las Vegas, where I was shot 3 times. And so the history of that is quite intensive.
Tell me about your childhood.
So I grew up in Palmdale, California, in the desert. Pretty much did everything. Tried all the possibilities I could. So I went to Taekwondo. I did hockey, soccer, dance, cheer. I ended up getting into 4-H and I showed horses. And so I was a very active child, wanted to do it all. And then I went into college and got an AA in business and kind of trying to figure out where I wanted to go with that, and ended up finding event coordinating and really liking it. I like the tediousness of it and the busyness. It's still a working job, so I can do some stuff physically. Like I said, I'm pretty active, so I like to be moving and doing everything I can.
So you touched on 4-H. So in 4-H, I'm a little bit familiar with it, but dealing with a lot of farming and animals, horseback riding, all that kind of stuff. What's that like?
Yeah. So from 5 years old, I got my first horse. Both my grandma and my mom and that whole side of the family were always in love with horses. And so that's kind of where the agricultural side fell into my life. And then once I got into middle school, I was introduced to 4-H, where I showed sheep, I did pigs, and then you can also do showing with your horses and such. There's so many other opportunities with 4-H, but it was just kind of like a great achievement, I would say.
What year is this that we're talking about?
Gosh, make me go back. Probably 2002, and I did it for 4 years.
Gotcha. And then when was it that you moved to Tehachapi?
Yeah, so in 2007, we moved from Palmdale to Tehachapi, and I was going into my 11th grade year. I ended up doing homeschooling for that 11th grade year just because I was doing a competitive cheer company. And so I was commuting down to still do that. And it just ended up being a lot. So, and then I wanted to make sure that I was in school for my senior year. So I finished my senior year at Tehachapi High School.
So what was that like moving, and changing schools in the 11th grade? What was that like?
It was definitely different. So Palmdale was a high school. I grew up there with all my friends from elementary to high school. And so if I would have graduated from that school, it was around 1,000 students, and then 4,000 in the entire school. And then moving up to Tehachapi was quite a difference. It was 1,000 students throughout the whole school. So my graduating class was closer to like 350, 400.
Friends still close enough to where you can still visit friends from Palmdale, or did you have to make complete new friends? I mean, some of that happens naturally, but what was that like?
It was still convenient. So it was about a 45-minute drive. I still continued a lot of friendships down in Palmdale, which was great. I still have a longtime friend that now lives in Washington herself, and we always stay in touch, but definitely created a lot more closer friendships in Tehachapi.
Interesting. Yeah, so you graduated from Tehachapi, and then were you still involved with courses and, that aspect of your life? What was going on post high school graduation?
Yeah, definitely things slowed down, I would say, in my junior, senior year, and I really started to focus on competitive cheer, which is really what I loved. It took up a decent amount of time, 3 practices a week. So I was driving down to Palmdale to go to that. And then during the competition season, you're doing 1 to 2 competitions a month and traveling all over the U.S. for those competitions.
Wow. So what was the end result of that? Did you get some national championships, or did you end up breaking your ankle or knee or something?
Always injuries. We ended up making it to Worlds, which is in Florida. And so usually it's the higher level cheer teams that make it, and you have to be invited or either win in your national championship to go to this competition. And it's from teams all over the world. So from China, it's essentially like an Olympic version of cheer, but a lot different from your like high school cheer. It's just plain competitive cheer, and I liked how intense it was.
This was kind of the same era as Bring It On too, wasn't it? Wasn't Bring It On like right around 2004?
Yes. And that was everybody's vision of cheerleading. I think competitive cheerleading really started to like escalate when I got into it, and now it's all over the place, and gosh, the skills are just endless and continue to grow.
So with karate and H and then cheer, obviously you were a super athletic person. Would you say that?
Yeah, definitely. I was just always ready to go and try something different.
Right. And so, post cheer, you're out of high school. You're in your college years now, and obviously, unless you go pro, NFL, which some people do, was that an option for you? Did you think about it, or were you kind of just done at that point?
Yeah, I was definitely thinking about it. You can get into you can get paid to do there's obviously NFL, but then they have the companies that put on all the competitions and everything, like NCA and stuff. So you can be like a mentor, essentially. And so you hold the camps, you hold all the competitions and such. And so there were other opportunities. And I'm not sure. I think at the time, my circumstances were different with kind of what was going on in my life. And it just didn't fall into place. I was definitely interested, but ended up just focusing on work and school.
Got it. So these are the days of, you're getting your college degree, and you're also kind of getting interested in event coordinating. Is this the time frame kind of around then?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely came towards probably the end of my college years. I always worked in like a social setting. And so I liked that atmosphere and that physicality. And so I always bartended or served, or I worked in a grocery store. And again, it was just always something physical in my life. And I am very organized. I like things a certain way. And so just one day I happened to think, oh, maybe I can do some wedding coordinating. I just loved weddings. I liked the details of weddings, the prettiness of a wedding, and how it was uniquely the same but different. And I applied for a position, and that got me started on event coordinating.
Well, let's talk about that for a little bit. So what was like your first big job with event coordinating?
I would say it was nothing excessive. It was all wedding focused for the most part, maybe like baby showers every now and then.
What
It was
about an
more,
embarrassing moment, like your first moment or your first, your first time
yeah,
stepping in from the role from like what you were doing previously to now you're kind of transitioning, you're playing with this idea of getting into this.
sure. I think the embarrassing part was just always being not married. And so people were trying to trust someone who had no idea what marriage was, let alone somebody who was 23, 24 at the time.
But you could be just good at your job though. So people, you don't have to be married to be just a good kind of logistics person. And for event planners, it's just really what it is. It's like action items and logistics for the most part. So
Sure.
yeah.
Gaining that trust, and as long as they can trust you, you'll lead them anywhere. I think I was mainly focused on day of coordinating, so we weren't too heavily involved in the whole coordinating process, and we essentially came in 30 days before, put together a timeline, met with any vendors that they had, and then we were there for the day of and just did any setting up for them and made sure that the day went smoothly, so the wedding didn't have to deal with it themselves.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're working as an events coordinator. You're not married. So years are getting along, and are you starting to get to the point where you're starting to think about maybe that might happen to you one day? You're seeing people get married. You're seeing that happen. I mean, obviously, the natural course for most people is that they do get married. Some people stay single, but a lot of people do end up getting married. Is this running through your mind at the time?
Sure. Yeah. So I was dating someone at the time, and I would say we were going on maybe year 3 when I got into it. So at that time, we are kind of like, all right, well, we're getting to a few years now. We've lived together. So when it's going to turn into something more? So it's definitely always on your mind, especially as a girl and your age. You just start getting higher and higher in age, and, the mentality of life is you got to get things done before 30, essentially.
So, well, that's going to bring me to my next question, which is Jesse's your husband. When did Jesse come into the picture? When did you first meet him?
Yeah, 2013 we met, and he was, like I said, he's a Nebraska native, a very small town out here, and he came out to California to do a trade school, and it was a month long, and we happened to meet randomly, and they asked us to show him where the local bar was, so that's what we did.
Where did you end up meeting him? Like when you first met him, what was that?
I was at Starbucks with a friend, and we actually didn't even encounter each other. We were talking with some of the other guys that were here for this trade school, and so they were asking where to go and where's the best place, and so we let them know where to go and ended up meeting him there, and Jesse asked if he could buy me a drink, and it was downhill from there.
So where was the place? What was the name of the place that y'all went, and what type of place was it?
It's changed hands a few times,
Okay.
so I'm not sure what the name is.
Was it just a regular bar? Was it a honky tonk? Was it Western themed? Was it dance club?
Yeah, it was just like the local I mean, it was an eatery slash bar, so you can eat during the day and then come up at night. And I
Gotcha.
would say it was definitely more Western. The town Tehachapi alone is pretty Western-like, and so that is definitely the atmosphere.
Understood. Yeah, I was just gonna say, it kind of reminds me of like the urban cowboy story a little bit, like Bud
Yeah.
and Sissy. It's a little bit Bud and Sissy, or no?
Definitely, that is our story.
Okay, good. Do you all have license plates in the back of like your windows in the truck?
We should.
You should.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. You get them done next.
Yeah.
Okay, so you meet Jesse, you all end up dating, and that moves along subsequently for, let's pick it up. I mean, you begin to become more serious. Like, what time frame do you think was it where you guys were more exclusively dating?
Well, I would say after about a year is when we really, I think, understood that it was more than just a boyfriend-girlfriend thing.
Got it.
And got serious from there on. But I think we were also very young. We were 23, 24, and so we were in no rush either. We were just having a good time and enjoying each other, and also being friends but companions.
Yeah, understood. Let's flash forward just a little bit and jump into what the year 2017 looks like. Where are you and Jesse at this point? Has he moved to California? Is he still based in Nebraska? Where are you living? What's the relationship like at this point?
Yeah, so 2017, we are in California together and had been for, I want to say, 3 years. We spent a year together in Nebraska the first year we were together. So 2014 to 2017, we had spent in California together. And Jesse had a job where he traveled a lot and had the opportunity to go to Italy to do some training. And at that time, I was also bartending along with day of coordinating, and just a wild spirit. And my friend happened to have an extra ticket the same time Jesse was going to Italy to go to this Route 91 Harvest Festival. And I'd always been interested. I grew up with country. That was my life. I listened to all genres, but this was 3 days of music in Las Vegas. So I couldn't pass up the opportunity and let him have fun in Italy. So I had to go have fun in Vegas.
Where was he in Italy?
Gosh, I'm
Small town?
not sure. Yeah, I want to say
Got
it
it.
was a small town wherever the company was based out of. But
Got it.
yeah.
Okay, so he goes off to Italy, and you are invited to go to Route 91 Harvest Festival, and you'd heard of this festival before but never attended. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
But you'd always wanted to?
Yep. And it was, maybe a couple days before that I had gotten the ticket.
Okay. And it was your
So
friend, your friend gave you that ticket. Okay. So you felt super lucky, blessed that you'd received this. You'd always wanted to go, and here it is.
Yeah.
And
Fun
what's that-
opportunity. And she was, it was kind of me tagging along with her and her boyfriend's family. So wasn't really familiar with any of the people that we were going with, just really knew my one friend.
Got it. Where'd you guys end up staying while you were there?
We stayed at Excalibur.
Okay. And so there the whole time, or there for just like 1 or 2 nights, or?
The whole time. So we went from Friday all the way to Sunday.
Okay. So you drive in, it's what, like 4-hour drive, 3.5-hour drive from Tehachapi?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it just you? Are you all traveling together, or are you separate with your friend and her
Yeah,
boyfriend?
so it was just me and my friend, and then we had met the remainder of the group at Las Vegas, and we were all staying at the same hotel.
Got it. So it starts on Friday, and it goes through Monday. Or Sunday.
Technically Sunday.
Got it.
Yeah, Sunday was like the last day of concerts.
Okay. And so what's the lineup like? It's like 20 singers or something like that?
Yeah, they have multiple stages, so there's kind of like new upcoming artists in one area, and then the bigger artists in another. And then there's food trucks and, benches, and people can bring in lawn chairs and coolers and everything you can think of. It's just a giant parking lot full of activities.
Yeah. Cowboys, cowgirls, cowboy boots.
Yep. All the
bandanas,
things. Alcohol.
Yeah, alcohol, of course.
Pretzels.
Funny. So what about Jesse? Jesse's in Italy, and then you call him or text him or whatever and tell him, hey, I just got invited to Route 91 Harvest Festival. What's his response?
Yeah, so we essentially left at the same time. So he had left on his flight the same time I was leaving for Vegas. So he knew before he was heading to Italy that I was going to Vegas.
Okay. And how did he feel about it? Was he supportive of that, or was he kind of like, hey, you can't go there without me? It's cool if I go to Italy without you, but...
He's pretty laid back. I don't think nothing really phases that man.
No, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So what was it like the first, couple days that you were going? Tell me what was that like?
Yeah, it was great. It was just an experience. I mean, my gosh, you can see so many different people in one setting, but everybody's just having a good time, and, no one's in a bad mood. You're just listening to the best music, having a few drinks and dancing, and it's a good setting.
Was it pretty hot around that time of year?
It wasn't bad, actually. It was perfect temperatures. I want to say like east probably. So you really couldn't beat it. Nobody was sweating. Nobody was cold. It was just a good weekend.
What about anyone in particular? I know I have some favorite country singers. Anyone in particular that you were really excited to see?
Yeah, I mean, Jason Aldean was probably my top choice. I had already seen him prior, but gosh, at this point, I don't know if I can really remember. There were so many artists, and that's the main takeaway that I took was Jason Aldean.
Yeah. So, it's all been real nice, a real nice trip up to this point, and everybody knows what ended up happening during this event. So let's start getting into that a little bit. So the night of the shooting, that's a Sunday, right?
Yep.
Okay. So you're getting ready. What time does the concert typically start each day, or are they kind of all day long type events?
They're all day long. I want to say they started in the afternoon and then kind of just carried on throughout the day. Like I said, there were multiple stages, so they'd have larger artists on the big main stage, and then they'd have, new upcoming on other stages. Sunday, after Saturday, I had thought about going home Sunday because I was just wore out. I had probably spent way too much money and didn't need to spend another day possibly in Vegas. I mean, I think we can attest to Vegas is probably good for 2 max days. So I had debated on going home and then decided, no, I came here mainly to see Jason and I'm going to stay and go. I don't even think we spent too many hours on Sunday at the festival. We mainly went there only in late afternoon, 3 or 4 p.m. And we ended up watching, I think, Sam Hunt, and then we came back and got a pretzel, giant pretzel. That's the last thing I remember eating was this huge pretzel, and to this day I can't eat one because it was last thing I had in my stomach.
Yeah. So that day, do you remember what you were wearing?
I do. I was wearing black pants with a burgundy top, and then all the jewelry, and of course my cowboy boot.
Yeah. So you go to the concert. You said you saw Sam Hunt earlier?
Yeah, and we were pretty close, and so we were attempting to get close up with Jason Aldean too, but ended up getting to the stage too late, so we were kind of set back a ways, not in the crowd too much.
Yeah, I like Sam Hunt. He's a good artist. So you make your way up there as far as you can. You got the burgundy. The reason I'm asking about the burgundy is I was kind of always interested is what singled you out just as an individual. But so you're going to the concert, Jason Aldean, he starts in. How many songs into his performance is he?
I would say it was really early on. I have never looked at how many songs he had played prior. I do remember the two when I was injured. I was actually FaceTiming Jesse when I was shot.
Okay, so this is unbelievable. So Jesse's in Italy, and there's an 8 hour difference usually for Central Time, I believe. So it's about a 10-hour difference. So what time is it in Italy when you're FaceTiming with Jesse? And are you like saying, "Hey, look, it's Jason"?
Yeah. So I think it was morning time for him because he had just gotten up because he had flown in shortly before that. So he had just gone to his hotel, slept for a few hours, woke up and called me. So we were FaceTiming and just saying hi to each other before he had to get up and head to his next location. And
the concert's going on. It's super loud, I'm sure.
Yep.
And you're probably flipping the phone around, right? You're saying, "Here, look at the concert. Hey, how are you?" Can you hear what he's saying? I mean, I know it's loud.
Think so. I mean, that portion is pretty blurry, but we were definitely having a conversation and having a good time. And that was the one night I was with our entire group. So there were about 10 of us. And that was the one night we finished out and stayed together, and we're all standing next to each other as well. And like I said, we were kind of set back to the left of the stage. So we were behind the main crowd of people. So we had a little bit more room.
Okay. So you're FaceTiming, you have your phone on, and then what happened? Like, what do you think happened? Do you remember that first hit? Do you remember any subsequent hits when you first got shot? What did that feel like? What were you thinking?
Sure. I always swear that I was probably one of the first, if not the first, to get shot. It was still, Jason Aldean was finishing up his last song, and that's when I was hit. And I fell straight to the ground, and I felt like I flew back. I always swear I went back like 3 feet because I remember everybody rushing towards me, and everybody was asking if I got hit by a firework. Like, at that time, nobody even knew what was going on. And then I remember Jason Aldean switched to his next song and was still singing that, and then another round had went off, and that's when everybody finally knew that shots were being fired and that it wasn't fireworks.
So I know you were shot 3 times. Was it a burst of 3 rounds that hit you around the same time, or was it separate shots?
They were all immediate. Yep.
Yeah. So most likely it was a burst shot that he had fired off. So it knocked you down. Do you remember the impact? Was it a hard impact on you? Where exactly? Yeah. Where did you get shot in your torso? Maybe you could describe that. Talk about it.
Yeah. So I was shot in my top of my chest, middle chest, and then in my torso. And it was impact. Like I said, it always feels like I flew back. Like, I swear I flew back because everybody rushed towards me.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
We were all standing next to each other. And it was like I was convulsing and screaming at the same time. And I don't know how I didn't drop my phone. I must have just clenched it so hard from convulsing and held on to it the whole time.
Could you hear Jesse at all at this point? Like, I know the chaos of this type of scenario, but there's certain aspects of when adrenaline's going where you can remember just the oddest things. And so could you hear him say anything? Does any of that stand out in your memory?
I could not. And from his perspective, he said he thought I maybe had a little too much drink and just dropped my phone. So I don't know if the call had just ended or the connection or what it was. But as far as that, I'm really unsure, again, like how I still even had my phone at that point and how it wasn't left behind.
So I mean, we all seen the footage, most of us at least, have seen the footage where Jason stops singing in one of his songs, and where everybody realizes that there's an active shooter that's opened up on the crowd. Obviously, you knew something was very wrong. The other people around you are asking if you got hit by a firecracker. At what point and what part did you lose consciousness? What point did they realize that you had been shot?
Yeah, so once that second round came, so if you watch the videos, the first you hear like 3 shots when Jason's finishing up that last song, and that's when I swear I was hit, because then he switches over, and that's when everybody realizes then there's more volleys, and I was already down at that time. But I remember him singing and then stopping and hearing people screaming that shots were fired. Before that second volley came around, they were already yelling for somebody to help me, somebody who was an EMT or knew how to, come figure out what was going on. But I just remember everybody yelling. At that time I couldn't talk or anything. But anytime you hear those movies and somebody gets shot or something, that ringing that you hear in movies, that's exactly what happened. Like, I was convulsing, and then I just hear this, my ears just big loud ringing.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, we've seen the footage. It goes on for a while. And so it wasn't like it was, you could just get up and move freely. Everybody's searching for cover and concealment. People are getting injured. People are getting killed. Obviously, you've been shot. You've been injured. Blood had to have been rushing out. Were people trying to stop it? And then also, you're calling for EMTs. And this is, I know this is like the natural instinct of people, is they just think someone's going to always be there to save them. And so it's like, hey, is there an EMT? Is there a doctor? Is there a fireman? Hey, call 911. What people don't realize is that probably the best and safest thing to keep you alive to do is to just get that person into a vehicle and literally drive them to the hospital as soon as possible. What was everybody's thought process at this point? And did a doctor show up? Did somebody come to your aid, like an EMS person? What was that like?
Sure. So I was awake the entire time up to being put under for my first surgery. So at no point did I pass out or anything. And a man in the crowd running away heard our people yelling, and then he happened to stop. And his background is not, he's an electrician, but he had lots of safety training. So his immediate response was, we need to get her to medical tent ASAP. So he picks me up. Somebody had grabbed my feet. We're still not sure who it was, but he grabbed me by my arms. Somebody grabbed me by my feet, and they started running me immediately to the medical tent. There was one point, it was pretty far away. One point we ended up dropping to cover again, because the volleys would come and then they'd stop, and then they'd come and they'd stop. So at some point we dropped to the ground and then got back up and ran again. One of the other girls that was with our group, again, I had met her that weekend. So she was from my town, but we really didn't know each other. She stayed with me. I remember my purse, thankfully, again, another reason, I don't know how all my stuff stayed on me, but I had a crossbody purse, and when they were carrying me, it was choking me. And so I remember yelling at her that I needed her to get my purse. And so she took my purse and my phone. And thankfully, that's how communication was kept, was because she had my belongings. So then we finally get to the medical tent. Another thing I found out at that point was I was one of the first to enter the medical tent and one of the last to leave the medical tent. And so I remember all my pain kept changing. It just was like different phases where, at one point my spine started tingling. So the medical tent is starting to pile up. At what point I thought I was paralyzed because my spine was tingling. So I moved my feet, and kept my knees bent to see if I could move them. And I knew I could move them, so I wasn't paralyzed. But then it got to the point where there were so many people in the tent, I couldn't lay my feet back out. And then there was somebody next to me, and it was just, and then so the girl that stayed with me was sitting behind me, and then the gentleman that picked me up from the beginning, again, he had the safety experience, so he knew immediately he needed to stop the bleed, and so he was the one staying on my main bleed on my chest and keeping that pressure. He took his shirt off and was keeping it contained as much as he could.
Yeah, keeping the blood in your body.
Yeah.
So at what point and how did you guys get to the hospital?
It was a long time. We ended up looking at my call history to kind of confirm how much time it took. And it took over an hour to get to the hospital.
Yeah, just traffic and chaos.
Yeah, so they essentially were just like getting people out of the medical tent. If they had passed, it depended on like if they were still awake or not, who they were moving into an ambulance or whatever. And then by the time I finally got into an ambulance, I wasn't even on a gurney. We were just packed in there. There had to be like 12 people in the ambulance. There was a gentleman in the center on the gurney, and then I was sitting on the guy who had taken care of me. I was sitting on his lap.
And the whole time you're losing blood the whole time.
Yeah.
But you're conscious.
Exactly. And he wanted to keep holding me because he knew he needed to apply pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, I couldn't breathe. I kept going through, I knew that I needed to I asked him just to give me a minute, and I put my head on the ambulance and just moved from his lap so I could breathe better. And I remember the ambulance going over curbs. It was the most insane experience.
Okay, so yeah, you're leaning forward. I mean, I can only assume that blood's filling up in your lungs and you're having problems breathing there. But as you can see, in battle and any sort of mass casualty situation, you can see how people can easily die because time is of the essence. The time is critical. And then the other thing that's most important for people is good field dressings and stopping the bleeding. It sounds like, other than this gentleman who was helping and keeping pressure on with his shirt and stuff, he didn't have the proper dressings. But in this case, it doesn't matter if it's proper. You just use whatever you have at the time. So you're driving over. He's still on you. He's been with you ever since they called him over. And it takes you an hour to get to the hospital. So do you guys pull up in the back where the emergency reception is? What is it? And do you what's that like? It had to have been chaos. That area was chaotic.
I believe it had to be the emergency room. But I remember them pulling me out, and then they finally put me on a gurney and wheeling me in, and it was just blood-lined walls and floor. It was just pools. You would have never known what those walls or those floors, what color they were, because there were so many, and there were people just sitting, anybody who was injured. So many people were just injured by being trampled. And so there were people lined up on the walls. There were gurneys with people in them. There were people in rooms. And I remember them just moving me into a room, and I was with another girl. I remember somebody sitting on the floor across the hall, and it was just chaos. It was yelling, it was screaming, all the nurses trying to figure out, making code calls, and it was madness.
So when you get in there with all these different people that are injured, that's kind of how they determine who's critical, who needs immediate
what color you are, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Setting up for trauma. So when did they look and know and say, this girl's got to go, we got to go upstairs?
Yeah. So essentially they just shoved me in a room, and at that point I was really starting to feel pain, and prior to that, I was saving every breath I could. I was barely talking. Jake was trying to have me tell a story and everything like that. said the
Jake
same.
is the individual. Jake's the individual that was keeping the pressure on your wounds.
Yep. And so that's when I finally started. I just essentially like crying out for somebody to get me help. I was basically like, just get me under so I don't die in pain.
Yeah, you were
And
sensing that. I'm sure the adrenaline was wearing off a bit. You were
yes,
experiencing pain, but your body was also telling you that something was very wrong.
yeah. And so I got to the point where I started feeling nauseated, and I was like, I'm going to throw up. I'm going to throw up. And the girl next to me yelled for a nurse. She needs help. She needs help. And the nurse came in, gave me a bucket, and I just started throwing up blood. And like mounds of blood. And so then they called for x-ray. They came in, x-rayed me, and then they said surgery. And I remember this is the one time I remember passing out, and right after x-ray they said surgery. And I don't remember from when they moved me from the OR room to, or wherever I was, the room to surgery. And then I woke up and I remember seeing the surgery lights and everybody yelling and them hooking me up to everything and prepping me for surgery.
What was that
And
like? I mean, that had to
again, it was
be
just
surreal, right? Just surreal.
like chaos. Like, was this real? My dad always says, like, are you sure it wasn't a dream? And I'm like, no, it wasn't. Like, it was so, I remember. And then this, I don't know, I still today don't know if it was a doctor or a nurse, and he grabbed my head and I was panicking, and he was, of course I was on my back and he was right above me, and he grabbed my head and he was just like, you're gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay. And all I remember, like, he looked at me and he was like, you're gonna fucking make it and you're gonna fucking do this. And then that's when they did the anesthetic. And then from there, of course, I was out for like 2 weeks.
It's amazing how much in the moment you have to tell people and give them positivity. And it's good that he locked in, and connected with you eye to eye and said those things, because little did you know how much trouble you were actually in, right?
Agreed. Yeah, I know. There was one time in the medical tent where I couldn't breathe. And I remember just trying to like catch a big breath, and Jake was putting so much pressure on my wound that I thought that was affecting what I was breathing. So I put my hand on my knee and I asked him if he could release some of the pressure because I couldn't breathe. And he was like, I have to. And I just thought, like, I was like, I'm gonna die. Like, this is how I die. And so the girl behind me had my phone, and I threw my thumb back because I can hear my phone the whole time ringing. The whole entire time we were in the medical tent, my phone was ringing. And I was like, I need to call Jessie. And so I threw my thumb back so she could unlock my phone. And I essentially like called Jessie to say goodbye and that I loved him, because things were
not
like,
looking good at that point.
Yeah.
What was his response? I mean, obviously you couldn't just keep having a conversation with him. So when you said that, was he like, what the heck's going on? I thought you just dropped, passed out, dropped your phone.
Yeah. At that point, he had a call with another friend who had communicated with someone in our group. And so at that point, he knew that I had been shot. And so he was at the airport getting ready to fly back and just was hoping, for the best.
Yeah, well,
but nobody knew what was going on.
Yeah. So for anybody who has a loved one, obviously when you travel, the worst nightmare is that something happens while you're gone. And I can attest to that aspect of it. But I can tell you that it gets amplified when you travel more than just a couple hours. But now we're talking about Jessie is actually overseas. So, from Italy to California, he's got to fly to the East Coast or, Dallas, Fort Worth or something. And then he's got to process through passport control and then get on a connecting flight to California. So in terms of anxiety and wondering what's going on and just a miserable flight, long flight. This is what Jesse was going through all this time and you're sitting here battling for your life, but we got to talk about the amounts of blood loss that you incurred. And then also what had happened was when you were shot, obviously you were shot 3 times in your torso, but the round or pieces of the round had broken off, and you found this out later, and had pierced your heart. And so they're doing these surgeries, you're losing blood, and then they do the surgeries, right? You stop me if I'm wrong. I'm just kind of bringing us up to speed. You're having these surgeries done. You come out of surgery, they think they're good, but then you're still losing blood, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, and nobody knows what's going on, and you're losing blood so rapidly. They're really worried about it because I'm getting all these things secondhand over text message and of your status. And they're trying to figure out what's going wrong. I mean, is all this accurate? It's kind of how I remember it. I said, via text message.
So there were 3 surgeries in 24 hours, and my main bleed was not found until my 3rd surgery. So at that time, and thankfully the hospital I was at was a blood bank. And I took 3/4 of their bank.
Right. What is it? Was it like 42 units or something like that, right?
It was like, basically they replaced my blood twice. They said I was losing blood as fast as I was taking it. And so my nurse didn't leave my blood stand for 17 hours.
Yeah. And it, basically because the heart was pierced, it was just leaking out internally into your body.
Yeah. So they couldn't find, so my main injuries were my liver, my spleen, and my aorta. And so they couldn't figure it out. And after my 2nd surgery, they essentially came back and said, like, there's no way we're going to be able to stop this. Like, get everybody here to say their goodbyes. And they went back for one more surgery, and they found my aorta bleed. The doctor ended up coming back to tell me that he wrote a book about it because he had never fixed that type of tear or bleed before. And it was on the backside of my aorta, and they ended up fixing it. And
was that the Air Force doctor? Was that the young guy?
I don't believe so. I want to say it was I can't remember what kind of doctor they're called for a heart specialist, but all the names are such a blur. I mean, I had like a pile of doctor cards, so I need to go back and kind of detail things out for myself.
Yeah, I'd love to read that book to find out more of exactly what was up with it. So yeah, I know that they had thought for sure that you weren't going to make it. There's a lot of prayers going out on my side, and a lot of people I know, hundreds, because they'd pass it on and then they'd go on social medias and so there was thousands of people praying for you at the time. And then miraculously, they discover that it's basically pierced through that aorta. And then when they find that, they're able to sew that up, and it looks as though, I mean, obviously you're completely out of it. This is all information you got afterwards, but it looks like as though potentially this might solve the bleeding.
Yes. And that was, from my understanding, that was the stopping point, and that they were able to just clean me up from there. And then it was time to, continue to hope for the best and see if their repairs tested time, and it did.
Yeah. So here, this is it. That was what the issue was. And when they were able to sew you back together in that regard, then that was what stopped the bleeding. Thank the Lord. But the other side of this, that's just even more amazing, is your recovery from like this hardcore traumatic incident. And it's what that looked like. I mean, even just a short period after you were completely, near dead, laying, on this bed. And then within a few days, you have to put it back. I mean, first of all, you give it to the Lord, but number one, but then the other part of this is the way that He created you is that you're a fighter, you're a warrior. And it goes back to, like you said, you grew up and you're always involved and active in sports and cheerleading and taekwondo and all these different things. So you have a fighter spirit, and that fighter spirit came alive in you shortly after. In just a few days, I mean, everybody was saying basically, "What? This is unbelievable! Like, this girl's recovery it's
Insane.
miraculous, right?"
Yeah. So I didn't really come to for about 2 weeks, but I was left open for 5 days, which at that point they also leave you in an induced coma. And the way everybody describes is I was essentially the size of your hospital bed, because I was so swollen from all my surgeries and all the trauma that they couldn't close me up. So 5 days of that, and then at that point they close me up, and then they start lowering the medication and getting me out of coma. So at that point it took me some time to really be aware of where I was again. I remember so vividly all the different dreams that I have, and then everybody else's story of what was going on in my room, and the things that I was thinking was going on and what really was going on and how it aligned. But once I finally woke up, it had been, like I said, almost 2 weeks, I believe. And I remember the first thing I remember is they were taking me back to do an MRI, and I was still really fuzzy. And they put me, I thought they put me in this giant tube and enclosed me. But they handed me this stress ball, and they said, well, you do have metal inside you. And so if you start to feel heat anywhere on your body, squeeze this and tell us, and we'll remove you immediately, because the metal can basically catch on fire, is what they're saying. And so at that point, I had done the MRI, not only to check what was going on, but then we found out that I had a fracture in my L2, which we assume is from one of the bullets traveling and maybe just tapping my spine just enough to fracture that. And then from there, they brought in PT, and that was the first time I remember them me to just sit up in bed, and I just sat, and then they moved me to a chair, and then they asked if I want to walk, and so I said yes. And I remember walking. I was right next to the nurse's station, so I remember just walking halfway down the nurse's station and then coming back. And then the next day it just kept increasing and increasing. And every day, I remember my doctors, when I was finally awake, my doctors walking in and just crying, because they were just blown away. There was no chance that they thought that I was going to make it, let alone be where I was at. I was expected to be in ICU for up to 6 months, they said.
Mm-hmm. And it took what, a couple weeks?
Yeah. So I ended up spending 3 weeks in ICU, or 2.5 weeks in ICU, because once I was awake and walking, then I ended up walking 30 feet and 40 feet. And so then they moved me down to the regular unit, and then I spent a week there. And then after that, I was transferred to a rehab facility for another week.
Meanwhile, Jesse has flown back from Italy, obviously, and he's been at the bedside with you, with his mom, and they're trading off, time with other relatives and stuff. And so, when was the first time that you kind of remember seeing him and knowing, what's up, and what did that feel like?
Yeah. It was weird. I remember when I was coming out of all the medication, I was feeling a bit angry. And so that was the one night that everybody ended up feeling comfortable enough to go stay in their hotel rooms and shower and take a break themselves. And so I remember them walking in the morning and really realizing what was going on. And I think that was finally an ease for Jesse, because I think that a couple days prior to that, I kept saying, "You're not my boyfriend. My boyfriend's in Italy." And so I couldn't recognize anybody. And so his mom is a nurse. And so he was very concerned, and he was like, is she going to be like this forever? And of course, any nurse is going to give you the worst perspective. And so they weren't sure what that would look like. And so when he finally came in, I think he felt like she's here, like she's back.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the day like when you were able to leave the hospital, and who was with you?
Yeah. Nobody was with me. It was awful.
Wow. Okay. Well,
Well,
that's an experience also we could talk about, but I mean, you either going to fly back home or you're going to drive back home, but what did that look like? I mean,
so I had state insurance, which sucked. So for that, nobody could ride along with me. And also they had to take back vehicles and such. But also because of my insurance, I wasn't able to be flown. And I was discharged at midnight. And so that was a 4-hour drive from Vegas. They had to take me down to Bakersfield. That was the closest recovery. And I was not even in like an ambulance. I was in this van on this tiny gurney with a fractured back, and they made me wear my brace the whole time. And it was awful. It was cold. And we stopped in Baker because I had to use the restroom. And normally they don't even won't even stop because it's just considered unsafe.
Yeah.
So we stopped, and there's 2 guys with me, and they didn't even walk me in to the gas station and wait by the women's door for me. They stayed at the van. So here I am post, and these guys just let me go in the middle of nowhere to use the restroom.
Heroes, right?
Yeah. And then I finally get into this rehab facility at like 4 a.m. And of course they want to like check all your vitals, and you have to do your whole assessment. And I was exhausted, and I just asked them, like, you can't wait. Just give me a couple hours to rest. I could barely stand. I had just learned to walk again. Everything I had to relearn. So I spent, a week there.
So you're staying in Bakersfield. So how many months until you were able to actually go to home or wherever you were living, wherever you were going to live?
It ended up being a month that I was away from home, which again was just like mind-blowing. When I got to the rehab facility, I couldn't even touch like a half a pound weight. Like I was in there with all these seniors, who had strokes or something, and they were lifting heavier weights than I could. I was just like blown away how fast I lost any capabilities and how weak I was. So 1 month in hospitals and rehab, and then I finally got to go home. Month 2.
What did let's jump a little bit forward from this. So you're recovering. You'll never be the same. Nobody gets shot in the torso 3 times and then is the same. You always have issues. But at what point you and Jesse come together and the relationship's still strong, it's still there? And how did that evolve into where you guys are today?
Yeah. I think at that point we had been going into 5 years of being together. And I think that just locked it, and we really realized that what are we waiting for? Again, we weren't in a rush and just enjoying each other. And still so young. I was 26 when I was shot. And so that point, we had been home maybe 2 months from the hospital, and we had went out to dinner with my family and came back to the house, and that's when he decided to propose. That was the same weekend that I was going back to Vegas because I ended up finding a bullet that was sitting at the edge of my skin. And so I went back to one of my doctors who removed it. And so Jesse had planned to propose in Vegas, but got too excited.
Got it. So he proposed at your house.
He did.
Was that a surprise? I mean, the guy always wants it to be a surprise. Did you kind of wonder, like, hey, you're acting a little weird. What are you up to?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a surprise. My parents, they were out. We came back from dinner and he was outside talking to my family for some time. And I was like, gosh, that's odd. And then we all started saying goodbye. My mom goes, goodbye, son-in-law. And I was like, oh, that's weird. Or future son, something like that. And I'm like, of course, my mom, hints something. But again, I was probably too ignorant to really think that he was going to propose. And then I was sitting on the couch and he came and just the biggest grin that you could imagine, and then proposed.
And you knew that? He dropped to his knee, busted out a ring, or?
Yep, he had bought that same day as well.
Okay. Well, that's okay. He did it. The timeline doesn't matter. So
yeah,
something like that. Look, it's either, you guys were together for 5 years, you said. Something like that, it's either going to make you or it's going to break you, right? Because
agreed.
It's such a traumatic event, and you could become a victim. You choose. You're like, am I going to be a victim of this, or am I going to be a fighter? And so this entire time you've been a fighter. And I mean, how many years have you been married to Jesse now?
We just went with our 6th year.
Okay. And that was how long after the shooting was it that he proposed?
2 months after.
Okay. And then
yeah.
And then you got married. When did you get married?
We got married shortly after in 2018.
What month?
August.
August.
So, yeah, 10 months about.
Yeah, I was going to say the Route 91 Harvest Festival, that's in October.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, end of September, October.
Yeah, exactly. So you won your life back from someone who maliciously was targeting people, that put a dot on you, it put a beat on you, and had intent to take you out of this world, but you fought it. Not only did you survive, but you made a beautiful life out of it. And now you and Jesse you guys have a baby, don't you? I mean, maybe
we
not
do.
a baby anymore, but
yeah, almost 5-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. So you got married and you have a kid. I mean, that's come a long way from right before you're going under, in that OR room, and that doctor leans over to you to tell you that you're going to make it, So you look at the split in time from that to that horrible moment where you're almost gone from this world to years later, married, and you have a child together. How does that feel?
It's always surreal. People, once they find out, now that we're living, it was easy and attached because everybody knew my story. Now that we're in Nebraska, many don't know it unless they're checking out my social media. So when they find it out, they're just blown away, and they're, how can you talk about it? And I think it's because it's so surreal. It just is it seems so fake. Every event that happened, that talking about it makes you feel not crazy. Like you did go through that and you did make it, and you will move on, and life is gonna suck, but we carry on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an amazing story, and I'm so glad I was able to have you on. I want to ask you, though, for someone who's faced such adversity and come through on the right side of it, what sort of wisdom can you impart on any listeners today that are struggling with anything, whether it be health or just life struggles or whatever it is? Can you leave them with, some gold nuggets of what you took away from this?
Yeah. I would definitely say feel your emotions. I've learned that with trauma, you go through different episodes of intense emotions. You're angry at some point, and then you're happy, and then you're sad, and they're large intervals of emotions. And so I think it's okay to feel that and just know, feel it, be in the moment, understand that is trauma. And then I think it's just sharing the love with others and trying to do good. I think sadly, events like this are really what bring out the good. And so I'm just trying to be the good myself and yeah, just move on and take your time to heal, but carry on as well because it can happen anywhere, anytime.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's we didn't even dive into, this could be a whole nother podcast, but the post-traumatic stress aspect of it. So stuff that military veterans deal with. I mean, it's not just exclusive to the veteran space, though. It's anybody who's ever experienced any kind of trauma. And we know that the mind and the body react. You had extreme trauma. And then there's all these other things that are linked to that. So I can't even imagine the stuff that you deal with, or some of the triggering incidents while you're out, or a loud bang or anything that could kind of connect it to that. And that's got to be difficult for you. And honestly, it's got to be also probably a little bit challenging also for Jesse, just as your husband, to kind of deal with that in a loving way. And I mean, is that something that you've dealt with a lot, the post-traumatic aspect of it? Does it haunt you, or have you gotten a good handle on it?
Yeah, I always say I am grateful because I think due to me being hit so early, I didn't see some of the things that, the two that were with me saw, or, I really could only hear the bullets, or I didn't have a chance to run. And so there's a lot of things that I am grateful that it happened so early that I don't experience, but it's definitely been an adjustment. I had somebody ask me, like, how often do you think about it? And every day. I mean, it's odd enough how just one thing makes you think of a memory and it brings up. In the beginning, I remember I was just always trying to find pictures of myself or try to find videos with myself in it because, again, it felt fake. And so I felt like that was justifying my trauma. Also, feeling like when you're telling your story, you're not sure if people think that you're lying or you're being dramatic. So that's, I think, part of that trauma is where you're not sure if people understand you or they don't want to hear it anymore. They're over it and it's time for you to move on. So I think I'm at that phase of this time, is that people still do care, and it's trying to figure out how to share my story now so it does some justice or it helps some others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why, from the veteran side of it, I can understand that. And it really comes down to is that's a lot of times that's why veterans won't share with other people, because it takes so much energy to even tell your story. A lot of times you feel like most of the time the people aren't that interested in hearing it anyways, even if they say they are. And so it's less effort for you to either sit down with someone who's experienced something very similar, or someone who was there. So then that way they already know what happened, and then you're just kind of trading, oh, remember this part? Oh yeah, and this happened. And there's less effort, I think, that goes into it. But at some point you just get around people that maybe don't know the story, and so you just kind of block it out and you just don't share it anymore. So I think it's really great that you've stepped into a phase of your life where you feel comfortable enough to where you can share, this story, because it is a story of resilience, and it's miraculous that you did survive, and the Lord had different plans for you, obviously. And I just thank you so much for sharing this incredible story with this podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you.